Abigail.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Dr. Delphos. That was really fascinating. Um, okay. Let me say a few things. So I'm a journalist. I wrote this book and uh, Irreversible Damage, and I wrote it just to look into a question: why were so many teenage girls suddenly deciding they were transgender and asking for hormones and surgeries, and why were we giving it to them? It's based on the research of Dr. Lisa Littman of Brown University, who asked that question essentially. Why she asked the question about the spike, and I asked about more broadly investigated what are the cultural currents? How did we end up here? Um, and I'll get into what my book found and what I said, but I think the sort of broader reason that we ended up here, and the thing that I'm most concerned about, is not necessarily the treatment for gender dysphoria, and it's not the policy, because those are things that I don't have necessarily strong opinions about. I looked into the risks of what's going on now, but I don't have a strong policy prescription, nor do I have strong medical views on how gender dysphoria ought to be treated. But I do have a very, very big concern about the fact that we can't even talk about these things. I think that is the biggest issue, and that's part of the reason that the medicine is so bad, that there's so little oversight, and that so many of these girls are able to get medication without actually having the underlying, correct diagnosis. And that is that we've been convinced that it's much nicer to engage in lies. In other words, that it's kinder to just accept the vocabulary of people who say they are in pain. So, for instance, just to borrow one example, puberty blockers. We all accepted and began using the terms that these are a pause button for normal puberty. No one knew, not even the doctors, because there have been no studies, whether long term, when you arrest the healthy normal puberty for adolescent girls, whether with puberty blockers like Lupron, no one knew whether these would be a neutral intervention. But everyone thought it was kinder to adopt that language. Oh, it's just a pause. It sounded very nice. And we've done this in so many ways. And I think that private kindness is important, but public objectivity is essential, which means when we talk in the public spaces about transgender adults who say they are women, we cannot pretend that they actually are. Because when we say that they are actual biological women, we think it's just a nice sort of harmless lie that we're engaging in to protect their feelings. But it commits us to things like losing the ability to oppose biological men entering women's safe spaces. We surrender that the moment we enter a world of lies in the public sphere. Now, I'm someone who I always use, someone's preferred pronouns with them individually. Okay. And because I think it's kind, and because I happen to like and care very much about a lot of transgender adults that I know. But when we're discussing these issues more broadly, it's important to speak the truth. So, what I attempted to do in my book was just that. It was just to look at this issue, what is going on. And of course, as Dr. Littman investigated, and what seems to be true based on my own investigation, there is a shocking peer contagion, a social contagion, because it's not just peer to peer, it's also coming from the internet and internet influences, that's affecting teenage girls. These spikes are alarmingly high, and it looks like it's just getting higher. I know in America specifically, we are not slowing down. In England, it looks like there's more hope. I don't know, but they seem to be taking the science very seriously. In America right now, we have no interest in the science. We care only about the political correctness. And it's a political correctness that will not let us have the conversation in the first place. So what are the facts about what's going on? Well, a gender dysphoria, severe discomfort in one's biological sex, which usually used to afflict 0.01% of the population, so overwhelmingly males, and 0.003% of women, so tiny numbers, 1 in 30,000, is now something that a substantial portion of teenagers are saying in America that they are transgender, and most of them women. The numbers are hard to ascertain in America, but we have certain indications that they're very high. One is that we know 2% of high school students in America are identifying as transgender. Politico just came out a report that I think it was a quarter of young teens are saying they are some form of LGBTQ. We know this is extremely high numbers that don't make sense historically. We know that between 2016 and 2017, the number of gender surgeries on biological females in America quadrupled. And we know that in the last decade, we have gone from 2 gender clinics in America to well over 50. If you include Kaiser, Planned Parenthood, and the major networks that are offering things like testosterone, it's even much higher. I've heard 65 as a number, but it's a lot. And right now in America, there's very little pushback on the notion that this is a good idea. It's silenced everywhere, from schools to gender ideology is pushed very, very hard in schools. It is something that doctors are afraid to speak out on. Therapists are afraid to lose their license if they object to the fast track to gender transition. Lesbians are under constant harassment in America by activists who insist that they too are lesbians, because after all, they're trans women. They consider themselves, these activists consider themselves women, and they berate anyone who doesn't regard them as a woman. Now I'm talking about the activists. I happen to know many transgender people who are lovely, who are not like this at all. I always make sure to say that because it's true. It's true. There are so many lovely and sober and wise transgender adults who do not behave this way and do not support the constant push to fast track our teenage girls. But we know that teenage girls are susceptible to these peer contagions. We know that. And as I discuss in the book, it has to do with the ways that as psychologists, I interviewed a lot of people for the book. I conducted almost 200 interviews. And a few of the people I interviewed were psychologists who are experts in the way young women communicate. And one thing they like to do is they do tend to empathize and take on their friend's pain. They like to sort of dwell on a negative event. They like to co-ruminate, as this academic calls it, and sort of rehash their pain and even take on their friend's pain. Of course, we see this with anorexia and other social contagions, and we're seeing it now with this trans identification. This does not mean I don't have the position that no one should ever transition, and I don't even have the position that no minor child should ever transition. That's not something I've ever taken a position on. But all I've ever taken a position on is that there are a lot of risks and we need to be able to explore them. And with this population, meant specifically, that is adolescent girls, many of the people rushing to medically transition seem not to have genuine gender dysphoria at all. So we have the real risk that they won't be helped by it. Okay. And it won't make them feel any better, and that they may be engaged in irreversible harm. So I suppose that's sort of what I wanted to say. The last thing I would just leave you with is, people write to me who are afraid for their jobs. They're afraid to lose their jobs if they, or their reputations if they speak up on this issue. I would just say, I never encourage anyone to put their jobs or families at risk for taking on this issue, okay? But here's what I would encourage everyone to do. There is no reason to start parroting lies, especially in the public sphere. So for instance, when you talk about Christians or Christianity in the public sphere, nobody says, and Jesus Christ, who is the Son of God. What they say is Christians believe because we all acknowledge that we're talking to a diverse group of people, some of whom do not share that belief. That's okay. That's perfectly fine that not everyone shares that belief, but we just honor, we describe it in the public sphere as objectively as we can, because we're trying to find common cause, but also communicate clearly about these ideas objectively. The same must be the standard for discussions around gender dysphoria and medical transition. This is not about hurt feelings, it's about medicine. So we must know who these people are, who this population is. Are they being helped? Are they being hurt? And we must be able to question that. It's not a matter of concern about people's feelings cannot be allowed to dominate when you have major medical interventions with irreversible consequences. So I would encourage everyone to always sort of to not adopt the terminology in publicly. When speaking in public, not feel that they must adopt the terminology that they do not believe to be true. That doesn't mean ever showing disrespect to someone who's transgender or anybody else, frankly. But it does mean not constantly buttressing this world of lies that we seem to be erecting, and is really leading to no place good. Anyway, that's all I came to say.
Well, it's very important what you said, and it's very important to be clear about language. And thank you very much for your talk about this. You have inspired many people. I think there are many things you use coming on in the chat. I'm not. The only question I got was that there was something going wrong with the crowdfunding for your new book, or can you tell us something about that?
Sure. Parents. There have been a lot of efforts to censor me in America, and from the technology, and so parents, this has nothing to do with me. The money does not go to me. I have nothing to do with it. I'm not running it. Nothing to do with me. But parents who thought that I explored the issue honestly, they paid for a big billboard in Los Angeles to, tell people to buy the book and to warn parents about the issue. And it got so much excitement that many parents across the country were writing in to ask if they could put up a billboard and donate to it. So the original billboard GoFundMe was taken down they canceled it. The GoFundMe took it down. The parents have now put up a second one. So I just tweeted it out, but I don't have any knowledge of it beyond that. I don't know how they accomplished it. I know the, identity of the parents, but that's all I know. And that's obviously confidential. But I have nothing to do with the billboards beyond that.
Okay. So, and are you planning to write a next book about this?
For my next book, I think I'll take on a different topic.
Okay. Yeah, that's staying healthy yourself, I think. It's a difficult subject. Do you have do you have account adversary in your work right now because of your book?
Sorry, say it again. Do I have?
But does it affect your work and the way people look at you that you wrote this book?
Of course.
Explain a bit about that.
Sorry, say it again.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Everybody wants to know about that. So I don't like to dwell on it because I don't want anyone to get the false impression that they can intimidate me.
Yeah.
But do I get a lot of pushback? Yes, of course, both in sort of public and private.
So thank you very much, Abigail.